Hey guys, it's FilterSC here, and I'm back for another video. This is episode number 2 of the Bronze to Master series, and we're talking about the real core fundamental basics here. In this particular episode, what I really want to do is just go over the different playstyles that you can employ in the game, why it's important to understand all three at the very least, and be able to execute a couple of them on ladder. Alright, so the three main playstyles in Starcraft 2 are what's called cheese, economic cheese, and standard play. Now, cheese is basically anything that is a real coin flip. So if you're playing against somebody and you're trying to do an in-base proxy on the absolute extreme end of cheese, it comes straight up down to will they scout it in time, and if they don't, you win. Very simple, very straightforward. With a lot of two-player maps, it's very easy for a Protoss player to slip a couple gateways into your base and try to kill you with zealots. Cheese tends to be a little bit more common in mirror matchups because the player understands his own race a little bit better, and he's come up with a build or found a build online that is very simple and easy to pull off, and it kind of gets him out of the mirror matchup if he doesn't like it or he's frustrated by it. Economic cheese is completely different. Economic cheese is you're basically flipping a coin that your opponent is not going to attack you, he's not going to try to cheese you, and he's going to fail to hit any kind of timing that would kill you off. Now, in Wings of Liberty, the most common economic cheese was typically by Protoss players, and they didn't realize that they were actually economic cheesing for the most part. What would happen is they would have very few gateways and very few units, but a big economy, and get to that big Colossus, Zealot, Archon, Deathball, and just mow people down. Economic cheese is probably the hardest type of cheese to deal with, but as you kind of start to play and gain experience and grow, you're going to figure out how to start punishing those people and kind of picking off the people on ladder that are placing too high, because all they do is rely on economic cheese, so the rest of their game is not quite up to snuff. The last one is what's called standard play. Standard play is typically safe against both kinds of cheeses and incorporates a ton of different varying types of play, like mech and bio would both be considered standard play for Terran. The important thing to note here is something can be a cheese and considered the standard of what a race typically is doing. That does not mean it's standard play, so to speak. One of the best examples of this was the 111. The 111 in Wings of Liberty was just a straight up one base cheese, one base all in. It was the standard for how Terrans played, but it wouldn't be called a standard play because it wasn't safe, and it was a little bit more coin flippy, although at the time it was extremely overpowered. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit more in depth about the playstyles and why you should kind of understand them. I'm going to start with cheese first. Now, a lot of people look down on cheese and see it as a negative thing. However, there are some good things about cheese. It is good to have a couple of cheese builds in, and it's not because you're going to go out and play a tournament, because a lot of people aren't, but hey, if you are, it's good to have a couple of cheese builds in there. That's why you see a lot of pros that have some cheese builds. Even Flash has a couple of really nasty, dirty ones that he likes to use, and he's probably as standard as it gets for a StarCraft 2 player. So the big deal with cheese is you're essentially just flipping a coin, hoping you're going to win the game. A lot of your cheese build order relies on your opponent making mistakes. If your opponent doesn't make these mistakes and plays quote-unquote correct, your cheese is going to fail, and there's really nothing you can do about it. Now, what that leads to is a situation where you can beat people that are better than you, but at the same time you're going to lose to people that are worse than you, and there's very little of the game that is within your control. When you choose a cheese build, you're choosing to win the match either really quickly on your opponent's mistakes, or if your opponent plays it out perfectly, you lose the game. It's very simple and straightforward. Now, where cheese is effective is if you've hit like 4 or 5 Zergs in a row and you're just tired of them, then you pull your 11-11 racks and you go for it. Win or lose takes 6-7 minutes, you go find another game. Hopefully it's not another Zerg. So it is good to have a couple of cheeses in. That'll get you past on the ladder when you keep hitting the same race and you're just kind of sick of the matchup. Having those cheeses is a really good way to kind of get around those games without having to sit there and play through something that you're not enjoying and you're not having fun. Now, the next thing I want to talk about that nobody really seems to mention a lot is what's called an economic cheese. Now, an economic cheese, as I explained, is when you essentially roll the dice that your opponent's not going to attack you and you're going to win the game that way. Protoss players, absolutely notorious for economic cheeses. That's one of the biggest reasons why that 10-minute timing attack worked a lot in Wings of Liberty, because if a Protoss player was not actually that good and just relied on getting a heavy economy and getting a death ball and just A-moving and rolling you over, that 10-minute attack would kill him. Now if the Protoss player was actually good, and a lot of times he'd be at the same ladder points as the other guy who theoretically wasn't that good, he would be able to fend that off, and then you would go through and have kind of a standard game from there. Now, when is economic cheese useful? Economic cheese is useful if you make a mistake and you want to take a risk to kind of get yourself back in the game. One of the best examples recently is I completely butchered and I made 2 extra barracks before my command center. My response to that was, well, I guess I'm going to go all in with an economic cheese. What I did was make 2 extra command centers, and I didn't actually make any marines off my barracks until I'd finished the command centers. I ended up winning the game with a much superior economy to my opponent. That being said, if my opponent had just simply attacked me, I would have died. It would have been very simple and straightforward and easy for him to win the game. It's really important to identify when you are playing the game and you are trying to play kind of a standard heavy macro style that you're not economic cheesing. If you find you're losing a lot of games to, your opponent's doing some kind of early cheese or whatever, then chances are you're just doing something way too economical and you can't get away with it. If you're trying to make 3 command centers off 1 barracks, situationally you can make a read and that's okay and it can be a standard play, but for the most part it's an economic cheese. You want to really look at your build and look at how you're playing. Economic cheese has its place, but understand if you're losing a lot in kind of the early or the mid game, you might be trying to economic cheese and not even know it. Now the last type of playstyle is what's called standard. What is standard play? Standard play is a type of build order and a playstyle that is safe to almost all the cheeses. So you're going to be safe to 90% except for the really extreme stuff that has a really low win rate. A good example of that is Terran when they do a 3 racks all in with a supply drop on their supply depot. If that gets scouted, the Terran player loses because somebody else will just make a bunker, they'll make cannons in their main, whatever it is. But at the same time, if you're playing standard and you just kind of fail to scout or something happens, you're going to lose to that build. However, if the Terran does something like, fast cloak banshees or really quick drop, something like that in the back of your base, if you're playing standard and you're doing it properly, you're going to be able to hold off that attack and then punish your opponent because he's only going to be on 1 base compared to the multiple bases you are on. Standard play is probably the most common type of play style, and it's probably the best one to learn as kind of your fundamental base. The reason for that is if you're a very good standard player, branching out to do some cheese, not too difficult. Branching out to do some economic cheese should be very easy if you're a standard player. And at the same time, you have a base where you can fundamentally work on, and every game that you win or lose is 100% your fault. It no longer comes down to your opponent's scouting or your opponent's mistakes that he makes that give you the victory. It comes down to your own play and you playing properly and you executing. If you play a full standard play, 90 to 95% of the games that you outplay your opponent, you're going to win. That's simply not the case in economic or cheese style builds. Standard play is definitely the way to go, even though it's by far the most broad spectrum of overall playstyles. Alright, so that just about wraps up this particular video. Now, the reason I dedicated a whole video to this, and I really wanted to talk about it, is because it's important to kind of set a standard and understand the different types of playstyles in StarCraft 2 in terms of cheese, economic cheese, and standard play, and kind of understand that there's a time and a place for all of them. Just because the other guy cheesed you doesn't mean he does it every game, and even if he does do it every game, he's in Masters just as you are. But the big thing to remember and kind of take away from this video is if you're a cheese player, what's going to end up happening is you're going to reach a point where you're going to find it very difficult to improve. You're always going to be looking for the next great cheese, the next great build that is going to carry you through to your victories. If you're an economic cheese player, what's going to happen is you're going to find a lot of games super frustrating because you tend to lose very early on, and it's just going to feel awful because you're going to feel out of control and unable to stop it when the Zerg does that early Baneling bust and kills you off. What you want to try to do is kind of head yourself towards the standard play where you can defend cheeses and you can get to and play the late game, and at the same time, if you're sick of a particular matchup and you want to pull a cheese out, you're more than capable of doing it. The big thing to remember is there is no limit on a standard player. If you play the quote-unquote standard, you're going to be able to get all the way up to Masters, you can get to GM, you can get to professional level. There's really no point where you're going to be able to stop improving and stop finding problems with how you play, and keep on getting better and just do it at a better rate and a faster pace. It's much easier to see the holes and the problems in standard play than it is to see holes and problems in a cheese play or an economic cheese play. It's something that's very important to remember, and I hope you take that away from the video and understand why I think teaching standard play is the best way to go versus learning how to cheese and that kind of stuff. Again, it's important. Cheese is a good way to get out of certain matchups or certain games if you don't particularly want to play it. Economic cheese is a great way to get yourself back into the game, where you're essentially just rolling the dice and hoping it works. I do economic cheese from time to time. I do regular cheese from time to time. But at the same time, when I'm playing standard, it's very easy to see where the problems are in my build. Very easy to fix them. It's very easy for me to continuously keep getting better and better at the game. Anyway guys, keep tuning in. For the next video I'm going to talk about choosing a race, so we'll dive into that. Anyway guys, this is Filter Starcraft, signing off. Hopefully you all have a really good day.